When you think of cartoon crossovers, you got a lot of options. The Jimmy Timmy Power Hour trilogy? Oh yeah, absolute classics. You also got things like House of Mouse. You know, the show where Mickey and friends get to play cartoons towards the Disney characters? Yeah, another classic of a crossover. And speaking of Disney crossover, did you know that Lilo and Stitch has crossovers with other Disney shows? Weird, but still pretty cool. And then you also got this.
Oh, you nailed that one!
Oh yeah, that one. Premiering on November 11, 2007, The Grim Adventures of the KND is a 22-minute crossover special between The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and Codename Kids at North Door. Coincidentally, both of these shows were the winners of Cartoon Network's The Big Pig event in 2000 and 2001 respectively. Around the time the crossover was made, both of the shows were coming into an end, and so the show's creators, Maxwell Adams and Mr. Warmington, respectively, since they were very good friends, decided to do a crossover event to wrap out their series. Okay, not necessary, but still. And if you go on the internet, whenever people are talking about iconic cartoon crossovers, you often see this one labeled as one of the best cartoon crossovers ever made. But as you can see from the video title, I do not agree. But why did I think this crossover is bad and, dare I say, overrated? Well, that's a good question, Forky, and today I'm going to answer it. So here's a recap of the Grim Adventures of the KND and why I think it sucks. The crossover begins when Harold leaving the house to buy underwear, and he tells Billy not to wear his lucky pants. But guess what? Billy ends up wearing the pants anyway, because he's stupid. The way that Billy wears these long pants remind me a lot of the ones in Grumman's short film, the Ron trousers, so I'm kinda wondering if that was intended to be a homage to that. Anyway, he goops on and he accidentally trips and gets Grim's knife stuck on the pants. Oh no, poor Billy, what's he going to do? The Eds from Ed, Ed, and Eddie make a cameo in this because Billy tries to call them for help, but guess what? Billy is poor. However, Eddie tells them to call the kids next door because they happen to be cheaper. Anyway, so after that, we get to see the crossover intro, which is actually a mashup between the two shows' intros. And I gotta say, I really like this. I feel like this is what crossovers should do when they do the intro, because that is generally really cool to see these two different intros combined. I think the only other instance that I can recall seeing that would be the Jesse crossovers they did for Austin and Aldi and Good Luck Charlie, but I think I might misremember because they only aired when they premiered back in the early 2010s. Anyways, the cast from KND has arrived, and they try to get the pants off, but because they're way too stuck thanks to Grim's knife, they decide to do the following. The kids next door go on to take Billy to the deep lab sea so they can take this knife and the pants off, while number one stays here, disguised as Billy, while distracting anyone that comes here. And alright, I want to tell you the biggest issue that I had with this crossover. By the time it came out, Billy and Mandy stopped being good. And when I say that it stopped being good, I don't mean that it became bad like that's for Lab and the Powerpuff Girls. I'm just saying that for its final two seasons, because the show ran for pretty much a long while, its loud, random, stupid, and mean humor has lost a lot of its charm. And the reason can go because of its two main characters getting flanderized. We're going to start with the obvious one. Billy got dumber! In the earlier seasons, Billy was a crazy kid. Yes, he can say random things, but at the same time, you can still laugh at him and also relate to things, such as him wanting to celebrate a surprise birthday party to Mandy. However, as you probably expected from a comic relief character, Billy suffered the flanderization into becoming a lot more annoying and stupider, so it ends up making him come across as incredibly annoying rather than funny. And this crossover is a perfect example for what I'm referring to. I mean, it's hard to root for him when he was the one that disobeyed his father's orders in the first place. And guess what? Despite the pants being a major plot in this story, he immediately forgets about the pants after he is taken with the KND to the deep black sea. It's said that there's a twist. Number 362 tells the kids next door that the delightful children are planning something evil. Ooh, so they gotta go stop them. Back in Ennsville, Mandy has arrived and she knows that number one is not Billy, so she tortures him by showing Fred talking about his favorite shows. Those ones that have monkeys, monkeys that go to camp, and imaginary friends. He is referencing the following shows: My Gym Partner's a Monkey, Camp Lazar, and Foster Home for Imaginary Friends respectively. But here's an interesting what could have been scenario. Originally, Mandy was supposed to torture number one by playing sheep in the big city and then later Evil Incarnate. But those ideas were scrapped because both of those shows were considered too obscure to reference. But Evil Incarnate was also created by Maxwell Adams. One of his characters, General Scar, got to appear in Grim Adventures as a recurring character, and there was even a crossover episode that came out in 2007, and the show was even referenced in this crossover's credits, so I don't see the logic. After number one told her about the KND, Mandy's like, alright, I'm going to pay a visit to that. And let me tell you that Mandy was also philanderized during the final 2 seasons, because in the early days of her show, Mandy was an anti-heroine. Yes, she is not necessarily a nice girl, but at the same time, she did showcase some care towards Grim and Billy, such as anytime that Billy is constantly bullied by bully whose name is considered offensive nowadays towards people with Asperger, myself included. Yes, Mandy can be mean, but she's not super evil. However, that is until the final 2 seasons of the show, where they change her into a full-on antagonist. Yes, and this crossover is probably Mandy at her absolute worst because she is now a power-hungry villain who wants power because evil! Speaking of antagonists, the Delightful Children has a machine that they are going to use to turn kids into delightful slaves. Billy mistakes her for the veteran, and he accidentally gets him, the Delightful Children, Grim Snyder, and the Pens fused together into a giant monster known as the Delightful Grim. And he wants to annihilate everyone. Uh-oh, we're in big trouble. The team escapes except for number 2. No! Oh, by the way, I'd like to point out that number 2 is very underutilized in this crossover because he only gets 3 speaking lines individually. Anyway, the remaining team managed to get on the moon basement, and guess what? Mandy shows up dressed up as number 1. How did she get into the basement or got number 1's clothing? Heck, how did she even know where was the basement located or what number 1 normally wears? He didn't tell her anything about that. So many questions that are never answered.
Number 1! Thank goodness you're here! That ain't number 1!
Of course I am. I'm just wearing my hair differently.
Oh, yeah? Well, to be honest, I never liked the bald thing anyway.
I know, number 5. These idiots can't tell that it's not number 1. Aren't you guys noticing things like the fact that number 1 is shorter, has a different voice, a thick line, and that's completely different? See, this is why I hate the crossover. They made the majority of the cast from Codename Kids Next Door idiots. Now, I heard some people defending their portrayals in this crossover because Codename Kids Next Door was equally as wacky as Grim Adventures. But then you got people like Terrific Tariq saying stuff like this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want a story with Billy and Mandy in it with smart people around them for 20 minutes? Do y'all actually watch cartoons?
No offense, but that was a terrible defense. But guys, it's a cartoon! Why would you want Billy and Mandy to hang around with smart people? Well, that's because that's how the cast from Codename Kids Next Door acted in their show. If you're going to do a crossover, it's important to be faithful to the source material. Take Turtles Forever as an example for what I'm talking about. A TV movie crossing over the 1987 and 2003 versions of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Notably, they exaggerated the goofy tones from the original TMNT cartoon to the point where all 87 turtles are portrayed as goofballs who never take anything seriously, while ignoring that the original show got darker during the Red Sky seasons. And ironically, this crossover came out when TMNT 2003 did silly things such as sending the Turtles and Splinter 100 years into the future, and when they got back home, Splinter was turned into internet failures and they had to find a way to get him back to normal. But Turner Forever never takes any time to make fun of TMNT 2003, so instead of having a repetitive pattern of making TMNT 87 look like a joke compared to TMNT 2003, thus leading to viewers who never grew up with the 87 cartoon into thinking it was actually lame, as well as insulting those that did grow up with the original show. So even if a show you're crossing over with happens to have a much wackier tone compared to the other one, you still need to be faithful to the source material, because if don't, it feels more like a crossover between a show and a parody of said other show than the actual show you're crossing over with. Some people also depended on it because the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour did something similar, but it isn't that one, it makes sense. Jimmy Neutron and Timmy Turner had similarities: brown hair, blue eyes, blue pants, names that rhyme with Emmy. It makes sense. That's not the case with Numbuh and Mandy. They had nothing similar in appearance, and yet Numbuh is the only one not fooled by this. Anyways, Mandy lies towards everyone that number 5 is crazy, and she locks on number 362 because supposedly there's a virus and sent her to quarantine to not get affected. Yeah, this would hit differently if it came out in 2020 or after.
Yeah, and we get to be number one's personal gods!
I keep telling y'all that is not number 1!
I know number 5, because this feels like this would be like the exact same thing that would happen on a bad cartoon, and everyone would be complaining at how stupid the characters are. But because this is a crossover between two good shows, that's clearly not a problem. Meanwhile, what has been number 1 doing throughout this special? Well, Grim shows up and he won his night back because he thinks he's Billy, until the two realize that things are going horribly wrong. So the two go to the moon basement to see what's going on, but unfortunately the two get caught because everyone is an idiot in this crossover because we can't have smart people.
Hey, look! It's Billy!
Seriously? Mandy's no longer disguised as number 1 and you still don't realize that she's not number 1, especially when he is right in front of your eyes? Yes, I get it. Codename Kids Next Door has silly characters, but again, they were not that stupid. There's a difference between portraying a character differently in a crossover and being painfully out of character. For example, some of the Phineas and Ferb characters acted differently in the Star Wars crossover special, but it isn't that one. It was established from the beginning that it was non-canon and it was done to fit in the Star Wars setting, so I'm completely okay to how differently the characters were portrayed in that crossover. But here, these are parody versions of number 3 and number 4, not the actual characters. This is especially bad when number 3's cameo in the Big Boogie Adventure TV movie managed to add a lot more like the character does in her own show than the actual crossover. And speaking of Billy and Mandy's Big Boogie Adventure, at one point there's a scene where it looks like Billy was eaten by a cracker, leading to Mandy to look sad in the ocean. This is honestly a very powerful moment because it goes to show that she actually does care for him. But to add insult to injury, this was the last thing that it aired during a marathon leading to the premiere of this crossover, meaning that we went from watching Mandy acting like she did in the earlier seasons where she did care for someone else to I'm going to take over the world because I'm evil and want power. The delightful Reaper continues to annihilate more characters in order to become more powerful. I had no idea why there's a bunch of random Codename Kids Next Door characters living in Nightsville. Number 5 escapes and frees number 1 and Grim from prison, and the two team up to take down the delightful Reaper and Mandy. And I want to tell you something very important and a positive about the crossover. Grim realized that Numbuh is not Billy. Thank God for someone acting smarter in this crossover besides Numbuh and Vi. Thank you, Grim. And thank you for not being Flanders like Billy and Mandy during the final 2 seasons. Laugh! Isn't Billy funny? Here comes the Mandrobot, and because they were in a rush, number 3 came up with the acronym of Monkeys and Nice Doggies Relax on Bullies or Turtles. That's an honestly really funny joke. And another positive thing I want to say is the epic battle between the Mandrobot, the Delightful Reaper, and number 1 piloting this amazing giant and grim skeleton and samurai. It's an amazing battle. Except for whenever Billy interrupts them to say an unfunny joke. Like seriously, he's so painfully unfunny in this crossover. Anyway, when the robot is... the Delightful Reaper is almost defeated, but Mandy's like, I want unlimited power. So she decides to fuse with the Delightful Reaper and become the Delightful Mandy. That's right. This is where the crossover jumped the shark. But then Hero, Billy's dad, shows up and he's like, give me back my pants. And let me tell you that he's so freaking cool in the scene. Wow. Numbuh and Grin finally defeat the Delightful Mandy, and everyone is free. And if you pay attention, you can actually see cameos from other Cartoon Network characters. These ones to be specific. Hooray! Grin has his snipe back and the day is saved!
You haven't seen the last of me.
She got away! Seriously? Hera shows up and mistakes Numbuh for Billy and grounds him for stealing his pants. How did he go into the KND basement? Why was Numbuh even wearing Billy's clothing in the first place? I don't know, they just hate Numbuh in this special. And speaking of which, Billy tries to pass him as him, but everyone is not fooled by this and throws stuff at him. But he still doesn't get punished by his dad for stealing his pants in the first freaking place. And the crossover ends with some made-up Cartoon Network crossover in the credits. Oh, this crossover was a disaster! Sure, there were some things that I didn't like, such as the combined intro and the references to other Cartoon Network shows, but they made the majority of Codename Kids Next Door characters idiots throughout this entire crossover. They don't even apologize to neither Numbuh nor Numbuh 5. Is this seriously what people refers to as, we used to have fun back in the days? A 22-minute and Numbuh torture her crossover special? Seriously? None of this is funny. I just feel bad for the poor guy. The writers for the crossover were the show's own creators, Matt Swearn-Adams and Mr. Warrington. And let me tell you, you guys are absolute legends, but I'm sorry. You didn't make a crossover between your two shows. You made a 22-minute Billy and Mandy episode with a mean-spirited and awful parody of Codename Kids Next Door. I feel like the sole reason people considered it as one of the best cartoon crossovers is solely because they're just being blinded by nostalgia. But I'm sorry guys, this crossover was not made with love. It felt like Cartoon Network saw the popularity of the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour and said, if we had CN City as our House of Mouse, we gotta have our own Jimmy Timmy Power Hour. But it didn't have the same level of passion and effort and the faithfulness to the source material as the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour trilogy had, and we just got a disaster instead. But that's just my opinion. Do you agree with me, or was I being way too harsh on this crossover? Leave down on your opinions in the comment section, and I see you guys next time. Bye!